Hey guys, welcome back to the Criterion Collection Review Series, and today we're going to be looking at another French New Wave film from one of my personal favorite directors from that era, and that is going to be Jules and Jim from Francois Truffaut. I would say Jules and Jim is probably one of the more well-known French New Wave films, one of the more influential releases from Truffaut, and probably the one he's most well respected for. It's probably this and The 400 Blows, which was one of his first films that he ever made. But Jules and Jim for me is a little weird because, as I said in my Hiroshima Mon Amour review, I'm not really a big French New Wave fan. It's a movement that I respect and I understand its importance onto film history, but most of the French New Wave films I have seen, especially ones from Godard, really don't work for me. It seems like a genre or a movement that is based more on breaking rules rather than telling compelling stories. One of the directors that I think sort of breaks that trend and was able to be innovative while also creating films that would stand the test of time is Truffaut. And I think this movie, Jules and Jim, is a really fantastic example of that, where the plot is this love triangle between three friends. You have Jules, who is this German immigrant in France in the late 1800s, who is kind of shy, very intellectual, he loves to get into tangents about philosophers and playwrights and things like that. And then you have Jim, who is sort of this lanky Frenchman who is sort of a womanizer in a sense. You know, he's very direct, very straightforward, and these two are best friends. You know, they share women, they share everything, they're just very close with each other. And one day they see this statue of a woman's face, and they say it's the most beautiful face they've ever seen in their lives. And if they meet someone who has a face like this, if they meet a woman with a face like this, they have to have her. It just so happens that they meet a woman named Catherine who has the same face, a similar smile, and they both fall madly in love with her. And it follows the 20 to 30 year romance between these three and how the relationships and dynamics change throughout that time. And I feel like what makes Jules and Jim such an effective film is how well realized these characters are and how complex they are. So of course Jules and Jim are best friends. Catherine enters the mix and starts sort of mixing it up. Of course she's changing their allegiance and their alliance. But they never stop being friends, which is one aspect that I always really admired and really found interesting. So you have these two guys that are just so close with each other, they love being around each other so much that even when they are not necessarily fighting over this woman, but they are sort of having their own interactions with her and their own troubles with her, they never take it out on each other, you know? Which isn't to say that either of them are necessarily good people or always do the right thing, which I think is one of the more admirable aspects of Jules and Jim, is how there isn't necessarily an antagonist and a protagonist. You know, there isn't a good guy or a bad guy. Everybody's pretty gray, you know, like Catherine has her bad moments, she has her good moments, so does Jules, so does Jim. You know, just when you think you like somebody, they do something that's really mean or very vile or just, you know, sort of selfish, and you kind of have to wrestle with yourself, just as these characters are, on, you know, how they feel about everybody. And people change over time, you know. These characters go through World War I, they start to see the rise of Nazism in Germany. You know, they're going through these large global changes and seeing how it affects their own personal lives and their own dynamics. And it's especially great to see them play off each other, because Jules and Jim, the two actors, do a fantastic job of expressing their friendship. They're very close, they're very, like, handsy, if that makes any sense, you know? And then Catherine is a very, like, difficult to read person, where she does whatever she wants. She doesn't try to let any rules or social norms hold her down, which is at once freeing and restricting for everybody else. There's a really great line or an idea about her feelings on relationships, where, you know, she doesn't want to be the one cheated on so that she can be the one to cheat, you know. And it just begs the question if she even fully understands the impact that has on people, or if that's just her way of, like, expressing herself and trying to get out of her boring situation, right? Which isn't to say that she's necessarily wrong. These guys sometimes do a poor job of including her in conversations and really, noticing her. And then when she tries to leave, that's when they start getting defensive and have this weird ownership about her. It's these characters that are likable, that are charming, but they're not perfect people. It's this 20-year long love triangle in a sense that goes to some very weird and non-conventional places. And for the time it was very shocking, and now it's not necessarily shocking, it's just different. It's not the norm, of course, but it does make for a really engaging narrative and a really engaging story. And what keeps the narrative and the characters and everything engaging beyond just the writing is the direction of the film. Of course, this is a French New Wave film, so it's trying to find ways to uniquely tell this story. And the way they do it is Truffaut basically just like throws anything at the wall that can visually represent what is happening and lets it go. The film literally opens with almost like the opening credits sequence, like a 90s sitcom, where it's the characters like messing around, and there's like this bombastic fun music in the background as they're like showing off the title and the characters and the actors. And there's a lot of interesting choices like that throughout, with this Truffaut's camera is spinning around a lot and always moving. There's the famous scene where they run on the bridge, and it was one of the first times that a camera like moved with the actors, was shaking and running. It wasn't on a tripod or being controlled in some way. It's a visually stunning film with a lot of editing tricks and visual tricks that still are effective today, and they work so well because they're not necessarily calling attention to themselves. They're more in service of the film and of expressing the characters and of what's going on. It's simply fantastic work, and again, it shows me why I love Truffaut and why I love his work so much. And while the characters, the narrative, the filmmaking, everything about Jules and Jim is so engaging and evocative, I think what Truffaut does especially well is sort of captures a mood or a tone. Jules and Jim, to me, feels like the progenitor to something like a Francis Ha, where it's this narrative about people doing very human, mundane things, but finding a way to make it feel young and full of life. Where Francis Ha, it's literally about a woman in New York finding herself and just going through the awkward phase of being in your post-college 20s. I think Jules and Jim does a really great job expressing the awkward, weird phase of young adults in Europe during the biggest wars in history, and how they dealt with that, and these new burgeoning ideas of society and sexuality and women, and a woman's place in a male-dominated society. It's all very interesting and complex and aren't necessarily answers. But the film also conveys this weird, nostalgic, melancholy tone that is, I don't know if comforting is the right word, but it kind of lulls you into this lackadaisical feeling or sense that is then uprooted by the film's bombastic editing and filmmaking, or by Catherine's very nonconformist nature. It's a film that's constantly keeping you on your toes, and constantly fighting with different tones and different feelings, but it somehow all works and makes it, it's a film that is uniquely itself, that very few films can emulate. A big part of the melancholy tone comes from the narration, which takes these characters that are like, they'll just be like walking around town, or they'll be in a field, and the narration feels as if like the tone of the voice and the word choice, it feels almost like the narrator is feeling nostalgic for this time and is sort of alluding to how poorly it's all going to end, or how everything isn't going to go the way that these characters believe it will. Beyond that tone, I think Jules and Jim also has a lot of interesting motifs and themes. The main one that really sticks out to me is kind of the tension between art and reality, where all these characters create art in some way. Jim is a writer, Jules wants to be in music, and he's writing books about plants and the ecosystem. Catherine writes a song, just all these different arts, and every single thing they write or they do or they create represents an idealized version of life and of reality and how things should go. So Catherine writes a song that is about two lovers that meet, grow apart, and then eventually do come together as if nothing has changed over the years. Jules draws a representation of this beautiful woman that, while it is simple, he's still trying to capture this perfection. Jim writes a novel that is basically a recounting of his and Jules' relationship. That is an idealized version of their relationship. But then reality itself is way more complex than that. No matter what stories you tell, no matter what relationships happen, no matter where things go, it's never going to be perfect. It's very unlikely that people will meet multiple times in their lives and be the exact same when they meet each other again. The way you perceive this woman now may not be how you perceive her in years later, so the painting is fleeting in a sense. This writing is how you perceive the relationship, but if the other person doesn't see it that way, or maybe someone reads it and finds a fault in how you treat the other person, it's this weird way of using art to try and capture reality, and then understanding that there are some very complex emotions and feelings and sort of an unpredictable nature of the whole thing that art can never truly capture, especially if you haven't lived through that. And it's also a matter of perspective and how you feel. I don't know. I think the ultimate strength of Jules and Jim, and I feel like I'm a broken record almost at this point, but it really is this capture of life and vitality, and even though these characters grow old and complacent at points, the film never loses that. You never feel things are getting less exciting or getting boring. It's a real shot in the arm. It's very unique and it's very well told and a very important film. I absolutely love this movie, and I love Truffaut as a director. Later on, we'll be talking about Day for Night, and I'm very excited to revisit that movie. Probably one of the best movies about making movies, and I think part of the reason it's so great is Truffaut pulling from his own experiences. But this release from Criterion is an absolutely a must-buy, I feel like. If you are a fan of this film, of the French New Wave, of Truffaut, or you just want to learn more about any of these subjects, this is like a Bible, almost. It is jam-packed with interviews from Truffaut, the actors, the cinematographer, the writer, the author of the original Jules and Jim novel this is based off of. And just so much is jam-packed in here. There's a really great discussion between two critics about the film and its influence, what it did that was so unique. It's just jam-packed full of special features, interviews, discussions, everything you would need. There's even 2 commentary tracks, like from film scholars and people close with Truffaut. So, you can't get better than this. And then the booklet is actually really nice. There is an essay from, what is his name? By John Powers, which is a really great look at the film and sort of the themes it deals with and what it's talking about. Essentially, they also include in this booklet the intro that Truffaut wrote for the novel when it was re-released in the 80s, I want to say, 80s or 70s. And Truffaut basically talking about him working with the author to make the Jules and Jim film, the influence the book had on him and his dream to turn it into a movie, and his own relationship with the author. It's a very fascinating read. Then there's also included these little notes that Truffaut would write to his writing partner and the people working with him on the film about things he wanted to include from the book, the style, the pacing, just generally giving a look into how he would want to make the film. That sort of this unbridled creativity, right? This passion for filmmaking is very much alive in Jules and Jim, which I think is what helps it to stand the test of time, is that you have a young Truffaut. I want to say he was like 26 when he made this movie. He's a very young guy that's able to tell this very complex and engaging and fascinating story about these 3 people in a love triangle and them dealing with the changing Europe and changing France. And I think he accomplishes that because he is so he loves film. He loves the story. The story means so much to him. And you can feel in every frame that passion and love. And it's a wonderful film. One that I think does hold up to the test of time and is an essential Criterion at a certain point. And again, another reason why I love Truffaut. He puts so much life and vibrance into his films. It's simply spectacular. That's Jules and Jim. What do you all think of this film? What do you think of Truffaut? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please like it. If you want more people to see it, please share it. If you want to watch more videos like this, why not consider subscribing? Where next time, we're going to be talking about the Orson Welles film essay, basically, the grandfather of video essays, F for Fake, which I'm very excited to talk about. But either way, thank you all so much for watching, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.